Our speakers now are Laurent Ungerer, creative director of design agency C Album here in Paris, with his partner Agathe Hondré, graphic designer and art director, Morgane Vantorre, type designer, and Raphaël John, 3D artist. The agency operates in the field of public institutions, museums. I started rehearsing the list of their cultural and institutional clients. It's actually way too long for me to cite all the clients, but they've been working for just a few to name, because that matters. Fondation Louis Vuitton, Édition Flammarion, Diocèse de Paris, Cinémathèque française, Centre Pompidou, Bibliothèque nationale de France, Archives nationales, Réunion des musées nationaux, Cité de l'architecture et du patrimoine. Needless to say, they know a thing or two about how to brand and design a public institution and a geographical location. In 2018, the world witnessed, with a good fair share of horror, the fire that took place after a welding mishap during the renovation works undergoing at the Notre Cathedral in Paris, and the collapsing of the main tower. Since then, rebuilding works have been underway, and C Album, together with Diocèse de Paris, have been commissioned to communicate and provide a new identity around this location. I hope they will tell us everything about it today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We are very honored to have been invited to the closing phase of the conference. We warmly thank the organizers of the ATypI for allowing us to share this precious moment with you. We would also like to thank the Diocèse of Paris for allowing us to show publicly the progress of our work for the first time. So we are going to share with you the results of what has been a long study extending over 3 years of questioning. Some parts of the project have not yet been approved. Achtung. I'm lucky enough to live on a small hill at the top of the Belleville district. On April 15, 2019, as I was returning from the office, alarming rumors were heard in the streets. When I arrived home, I looked out of my window and saw an unbelievable sight. Notre Dame ravaged by flames. I was so stunned that I couldn't capture it on film. Each of us remembered that day. A year after the fire, we were called by the Archbishop's Office of Paris to form a group of experts, including architects and designers, in order to implement a global reflection on the interior design of the building. From our first meeting, I remember telling the project manager that I was originally a Protestant, not quite Catholic. He replied, "It's not a problem, as long as you can say positively that you believe in mystery." Wow. "Yes, I believe in mystery," I replied. And indeed, our first visit to the ghost vessel gave us a glimpse of the desolate state of the cathedral and the dizzying construction site that awaited us. That day, I understood that we were involved in an unprecedented order. We began by familiarizing ourselves with the world of churches by taking up our pilgrim's staff. Numerous trips into France and beyond were necessary to understand the complex organization of messages in the liturgical space. Here is a table which attempts to synthesize the typology of messages. We have taken an example from the Church of Saint-Sulpice, the current temporary replacement cathedral in Paris. The first set of messages deals with wayfinding. These are identification and orientation messages. A second one concerns the cultural understanding of the place, often with its density of heritage information. Another set of messages concerns visitors, general instruction, with signs often translated into pictograms. Then come the religious messages themselves. They are timeless expressions of the religious experience. Lastly, there are the current parish messages for the faithful that are produced almost exclusively by volunteers. Almost, yes. The heterogeneity of this picture clearly illustrates the major challenges we are facing today. This observation is all the more difficult to overcome because in France, the law concerning the separation of the churches and the state leads to a double management of the cathedral space. However, by bringing together all the players around the table, it became clear that strong solutions were needed to restore the harmony of the Notre Dame site. The idea of launching a coherent type design program for Notre Dame became a priority.
Typography is a powerful part of the solution. It brings together all the different programs. It can be easily adapted to different actors, to different media, and different materials. In other words, we created a toolbox. We started by visiting the Notre Dame reconstruction worksite. Here we are, dressed up like robots. We surveyed the cathedral in details. Our first task was to understand where, why, and how typography was used. The oldest trace is a stone cutter's mark dating from the end of the 12th century. It's the only remaining example of medieval letter form in Notre Dame that we had. During our type design inventory, we found writings dating from the 12th to the 19th century. Lapidary writing inspired by Roman capital, Gothic writing. But the majority of type design is the restoration work of Viollet-le-Duc, who also designed the monumental polychrome murals of the chapels. They consist of figurative scenes and geometric ornaments that integrate typographical elements. Viollet-le-Duc wanted to restore Notre Dame to its original medieval glory. He supervised a large team of sculptors, glassmakers, and other craftsmen. They worked from original drawings by Viollet-le-Duc, adapting the various letter forms to their specific mediums. To understand the origin of these forms, we were allowed into the archive, kept in the Bibliothèque du Patrimoine. We were able to admire his pen and ink drawings as well as in paintings showing patterns and type design. We were particularly impressed by this model of alphabet that combines Roman and capital letters with more rounded uncial letters. Each letter exists in many different forms. By synthesizing the structure, we find two different morphologies. This applies to most of capital letters. Then we designed a lapidary version, and from stained glass technique, we got the idea of a stencil version. Here is a complete program in both variations, but how to make these two versions cohabit without opposing them? How to use this more historical uncial version in a modern way? We had the idea of combining these two versions within each word. As a slider, we tested several settings. Which setting were we going to choose? How much is too much? Finding the right balance between history and modernity. We quickly discovered that within the same word, it only takes one uncial letter to create a very distinctive historical context. And added advantage of using fewer uncials is that the legibility of the text is preserved. This opens up the question of multilingualism. To be able to offer a universal welcome to speak in all languages. We have combined our typeface with the Notre typeface, which offers an incredible diversity of languages. The Notre Dame typeface will be developed in extended Latin, with Notre taking over for other alphabets. Each visitor will be able to find a message in his or her native language. It's this program that we presented to the Notre Dame Steering Committee, approved by the 68th Archbishop of Paris since...
I then arrived along the way with this project already well-defined and started. And as Agathe and Laurent said previously, we have observed a diversity in letter forms into the cathedral, influenced by the forms in use during the Middle Ages. So the first step of the type design project was to identify these shapes, to understand their history and context in order to draw with full knowledge of the facts. So to get back to the basics, Notre Dame de Paris was originally a transitional edifice since it was built at the crossroads of the Roman and Gothic styles between the 12th and 14th centuries. And we know that this period also corresponds to the transition from the Carolingian to the Gothic scripts, during which we can find traces of proto-Gothic scripts, by the way, which I think are really interesting, as we can see here. And while while searching through these medieval manuscripts, I came across these specific and very beautiful ornamental letters several times. And they have caught our attention because this is something we have seen a lot into the cathedral. These capital letters are called lettres tourneurs in French, literally turn letters in English. Also called uncial and/or Lombard letters, or even Gothic letters in some cases. They are decorative initial letters introducing each new paragraphs or chapters in medieval manuscripts. So here are some pages of medieval music manuscripts from the École Notre-Dame de Paris. And from the 12th century onwards, we can see that these drop capitals become more and more illuminated, and with many colors and even illustrations. And one thing that we found really interesting, by the way, is that they are not letters written in one gesture, but rather, in a way, letters drawn and constructed in several stages. Moreover, these are hybrid letters as well, because their origin comes from Roman capitals and different variants of uncial writing, as Edward Johnston illustrated here on the right. And this explains their round structure and serif sometimes. And to be quick, their use largely continued over time. They were added by hand with a brush in the early days of typography and were sometimes engraved on wood or copper in the late 15th century, before being adapted to letterpress for smaller sizes later. They have thus survived centuries and were constantly reinvented until the 19th century, sometimes alongside Gothic, humanistic, or even semi-lineal letters in a way, as shown in this French advertisement on the left. And we can see on the right that Viollet-le-Duc was largely inspired by these forms in his murals too. And by looking at his drawing, we find in his hybrid alphabet a mix between Roman capitals, which are already reinterpreted, and also capitals with uncial influences. And of course, as type designers that we are here, we can see that there are a few incongruities, but this is something that makes the charm of these letters, meant to be painted on the wall and not calligraphed. And so begins the adventure of type drawing. Of course, the interest of the project is not to be too close to these ornamental forms and then create a kind of revival, but really rather to build on these references in order to design a typeface here and now and for the posterity. So first of all, we had to draw a skeleton. First for the uppercases from the shapes we had found in the cathedral. In fact, actually the idea was to really retain only the essence of the gesture. And from this, a wide variety of shapes were possible for each letter. So here are some examples of sketches. Here I try to find a system. But the challenge was also to find a skeleton for the lower cases that will fit these very special capitals. To do this, it was necessary for me to immerse myself in calligraphic research, and by studying medieval scripts, especially from uncial to proto-Gothic script, I was able to understand the gestures and the ductus of the time and reinterpret them. So once again, some ideas for skeletons quickly appeared on sketchbooks. And I can say that it was a quite challenging part of the work to find the same degree of movement in the lower cases as the upper cases. And we finally went to something more Carolingian on uncial influenced to fit the roundness on the origin of capitals. Then I completed the research directly on software by testing several variants of the same letter. So for instance, here the capital A. We can see as well the lowercase g. Even if all these ideas can be included in the final glyph set, it was necessary to make choices to make sure that the overall design remained consistent. Indeed, we have a very specific brief. The typeface is intended for the believers, but also for everyone. It must therefore remain readable and very clear. So we were careful to test different combinations of letters and choose those that enable a good readability. And we finally went more for a degree of hybridity in the same way of Viollet-le-Duc, which aims to give back to the cathedral its medieval historical consistency while keeping up with the times. It was also decided from the outset to keep the stems very straight, without any flares or any calligraphic features, in order to adapt them to various types of materials, as we will see in a moment. Moreover, it must fit as a display typeface, as a text typeface. So I made sure that the X8 was high enough to open up the eye of the typeface and optimize its readability in small size. So this is the complete glyph set so far. Over than 1,000 glyphs, including Latin letters, numerals, punctuation, symbol, etc. Declined in 6 weights, actually. And of course, the project is still ongoing and things can still evolve. But here a glimpse. So here we have the Latin uppercases with the alternates. And then we have also the lower cases with, once again, the alternates. We think about also the ligatures and the terminals as well, as we can see at the bottom with the R, E, X, and F. And then the person, it's also a glyph that I like so much to draw. And then the development of an extended Latin was really important because the messages in the cathedral will have to be translated into many languages. So both in Latin and in other languages using other writing systems. So as Agathe said, the Notre was chosen to be a companion to the typeface. Now the Roman version of Notre Dame will not stand alone, because of course the family will need to be completed by an Italic version. So a new project has recently opened up, and it is just as fascinating because the first question we asked ourselves was how to create an Italic from the style of Viollet-le-Duc and the medieval forms that predate the emergence of Aldez Manucci's famous typeface. So a whole bunch of questions quickly came up. For instance, do we go for a slanted one, or do we keep the specific features of the Roman? But for the very beginning, it was decided to design a strong Italic with a fairly high degree of slant in order to distinguish it from the Roman or to obtain a texture that counterbalances the rigidity of the Roman. And from there, a wide range of possibilities opens up. And this is my current job, actually. I think Italics are going to be an interesting playground because they enable a lot of movement. But of course, please consider it as a draft because this is what it looks like currently. But I still have a lot to fix, and I have to go further as well. But anyway, I find it really exciting. Okay.
The work of Viollet-le-Duc in the chapels is eclectic. We find there a great variety of painted patterns, of figurative scenes, and of a symbol of multiple inspirations. These patterns are either geometric or figurative and allow us to identify the saint or the subject of each chapel. For example, the small flames are in the chapel of Purgatory. The dragon and the sword are for Saint George. There are also recurring geometric forms, which are also found in stained glass, iron rocks, and most of materials. Pictograms are graphic devices that create links between historical forms and modern communication. Example of how pictograms can be associated with text. It can also be combined in patterns to discreetly accompany the visit. Another field of research would be the creation of specific glyphs for the reading of religious texts. Since the 12th century, monograms have been used to evoke the Virgin Mary. Viollet-le-Duc also integrated this work of initials in the murals of the chapels. The interlacing of the M and the A for Mary is an example. We are projecting to explore other ways of developing a graphic identification system on religious subjects related to Notre Dame. Type design is at the service of the message it transmits.
So I'll open up another chapter because we're clearly making a visual toolbox for Notre Dame. And so another tool would be a symbol, a mark, that we ended up coming up with. So at the beginning of our design process, a very essential question came up. It was, who is speaking? Because a lot of entities can take the floor and speak for Notre Dame. For example, there's the French state, which is supervising the reconstruction. There's the city of Paris, who is in charge of the project of the surrounding landscape project. The chief architects in historical monuments and associations, foundations. And actually, all those entities already have their own logos and marks and symbols. So in this pre-existing setup, how do we come with yet another mark to represent? So back to the question, who is speaking? So, excuse me, I folded it the wrong way. Well, so in our case, it's the Catholic Church. And while most of the institution express about the magnificence of the building, the architectural marvel, or the beauty and value of the craftsmanship that makes it, the message of the church is it's another nature, because it's not about the building itself, it's more about what happens inside. It's about the heart and soul, and way beyond religion. It's way beyond Christianity, because I think we were all moved when Notre Dame took on fire. So dependless of your belief system. We were all moved, shocked by the fire. And the welcoming message for the reopening of Notre Dame is a message that is meant for everybody. It's a message of inclusivity. So instead of focusing on the architectural features of the cathedral, we wanted to get inspirations from other sources, such as the Virgin Mary, or in the Catholic imagery, or the cross, the heart. So if we come back on the architectural features, of course, I cannot not introduce the silhouette of the western facade, which is the most recognizable, worldwidely recognizable feature. Everybody knows it, those two towers, those proportions, this rosette, everybody knows. That gave us kind of a hard time compared to what I was explaining earlier. And there's other signs we explore, such as the halo, the radiance, also for symbolizing the heart and soul. So this led us to quite a lot of propositions. This photo was taken during one of our presentations to get a feedback. So you might be able to see some typograms, some monograms, all worked with the typeface that we had previously presented to you. In the back, there's more logotypes with the figure of the Virgin Mary, of the heart, everything. We did a lot of stuff. And finally, in the end, a final choice was made. So it's born from the fact that you cannot deny the obvious, and it was just not reasonable to make a logo for Notre Dame, depriving yourself of the facade, because once you do that, it's just too weak. It's not recognizable enough, and it just becomes irrelevant, especially among the other logos that I was talking about, who kind of all use this feature. So we kept the facade, and we still wanted to combine it with the halo to still symbolize the heart and the inside. So by combining those two features, we came up with this design. So I voluntarily make a pause here, because depending on people, it takes more or less time to see the silhouette. But we're amongst peers, so I guess you found it quite fast. But once you see it, it appears like kind of like a revelation, and this is the experience we wanted to give the people that discovers it. It's a teeny tiny, heartwarming revelation. So the silhouette is actually just here to make it understandable that we are in Notre Dame. It's not focused on its sturdiness or else. It's more immaterial. We wanted to make it more immaterial so that we can really talk about what happens inside the cathedral. So the motion design was very intuitive, while the radiance, the rays, coming from inside to the exterior was pretty obvious, pretty intuitive. And as soon as we validated the design, we started playing with it, and playing with the medium of light at first, because for the same reason, it felt so intuitive, so obvious to use light as a way to reveal the mark. So experimentations. Yes, because it's still a work in progress, so waiting to be developed on future scopes of application. And we can now use the typeface, the mark, all the tools we developed before. So on different kinds of materials, make them go through the hardship of their application on those mediums to also get a feedback from it and maybe correct the typeface depending on how it's applied, maybe develop more variations. So among the scopes of application, there's obviously the display of religious messages we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, because since the tables of the law, basically letter engraving and religious messages have a long mutual history. So in the upper part of the screen, you have the classic Roman lapidary. And in the lower part, we got inspiration from the roofs of Notre Dame, which were the most damaged parts of the cathedral. So as a tribute, we imagined this mixed high and low relief process for messages. We quickly made a small prototype. And we were surprised because it's kind of like a lapidary, but it catches the light very differently. It's way more contrasted and more sharp. So it really gives you the idea, it really gives ideas on how, with today's tool, you can display messages and reimagine ways to display ancestral writings, for example. So the previous lighting experimentation of the previous prototype was fascinating. So we started doing more tests with more prototypes and other variations of the program, because the previous one was the lapidary version in terms of design, and this one is the stencil version made cut out from plexiglass. So you can see all the drop shadows, the effects it gives the object is very interesting. You have colored drop shadows and the way the light catches some of the plexiglass. And here's another application on another material of the same variation, because this still is the stencil version. And now it's submitted to the laser cutting on paper. And you can see how it's a very delicate stencil. It looks like, how do you say dentelle? It's lace work. Yeah, it's some kind of paper lace work. Continuing on the different fields of application, there is also textile, of course, embroidery, and screen printing. And we made some documents for internal communication. So you can find back the laser cutting of the stencil variation. And the most visible application you're going to be able to see so far is this one. So today, if you go in front of Notre Dame, you can actually see a bit of our typeface. Now I give back the floor to Laurent.
Thank you, Raphaël. I have a very short conclusion. So to conclude, we would say that Notre Dame is still in a state of becoming. Continuer l'histoire. That's the title of our lecture. And it's an invitation for next year, of course. Blowed by John in its Gospel. I think it's chapter 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Merci. Je vous invite à prendre le...